She gave up everything for a machine that did not even work. Not a house. Not land. Not a safe new start. A rusty old helicopter that looked like it belonged in a junkyard. The paint was peeling. The windows were cracked. Parts were missing. And when people saw what she had traded for it, they thought she had finally lost her mind. Some laughed right to her face. Others asked the same question again and again. Why would anyone throw away their savings, their comfort, and their future for a pile of dead metal? She did not answer them. She just stood there in front of that broken helicopter, staring at it like she could already see something nobody else could. That was the part that made people uneasy. Because she was not ashamed. She was not confused. She was certain. Day after day, while everyone around her mocked the decision, she kept coming back. Measuring. Cleaning. Pulling things apart. Working in silence. And little by little, it became clear that she had never planned to fix the helicopter. She was planning something else. Something so unexpected that even the people who called her foolish would later stand there speechless, trying to understand how one woman looked at rust, wreckage, and ruin. And saw the beginning of something incredible. Her name was Elena, and most people would have described her the same way. Quiet. Practical. Hard-working. The kind of woman who did not waste words and did not ask the world for favors. She had spent most of her life doing what was necessary, not what was exciting. If something broke, she learned how to fix it. If money was short, she found a way to stretch it. If life became heavy, she carried it without making a show of the weight. That was one reason people were so shocked by what she did. This was not the kind of decision anyone expected from her. Elena was not careless. She was not impulsive. She did not chase crazy ideas just because they sounded bold. In fact, she had built her whole life on the opposite. Small steps. Careful choices. Long hours. Quiet patience. That was how she survived. That was how she got through the years when nothing came easy. But there was another side to Elena that almost no one understood. Under all that calm, there was a part of her that had never stopped imagining bigger things. Not fantasies. Not impossible dreams. Real things. Things made by hand. Things built from effort, skill, and vision. She had always loved old machines, worn tools, and forgotten objects that other people walked past without a second look. Where most people saw junk, Elena saw stories. She saw shape. She saw possibility waiting under dust and rust. Maybe that was why she had always felt a little out of place in ordinary life. She could do the routine. She could smile, work, and keep moving. But something in her was always waiting for a chance to build one thing that truly belonged to her. And when that helicopter appeared, covered in rust and written off by everyone else, it did not look dead to Elena. It looked unfinished. By the time the helicopter came into her life, Elena had already reached the kind of point that changes a person. Not in one dramatic moment. Not all at once. It had happened slowly. One disappointment after another. One sacrifice after another. The kind of slow pressure that makes a person wake up one day and realize they have been surviving for years, but have not truly felt alive in a very long time. She had sold most of what she owned just to stay afloat. The little savings she once had were almost gone. The future she thought she was building had quietly fallen apart piece by piece. Work had become uncertain. Bills kept growing. The place she lived in no longer felt like a home. It felt temporary, fragile, like one more thing life could take from her without warning. People around her told her to be careful. To think small. To hold on to whatever little security she had left. But Elena had spent too many years being careful. And careful had not saved her. So when she heard about the old helicopter sitting abandoned in a storage yard outside town, something in her stirred. It made no sense on paper. It was damaged. Rusted. Useless to almost everyone. The owner wanted it gone. Most people would not have looked at it twice. But Elena did. Because she was not looking at it the way other people were. She was not asking what it had been. She was asking what it could become. That question stayed with her. Through the night. Through the doubts. Through every warning from every person who thought they knew better. And in the end, she made the choice that shocked everyone around her. She traded nearly everything she had left for a machine that could no longer fly, because somewhere deep inside, she believed it could still carry her into a completely different life. When Elena first saw the helicopter up close, even she felt the weight of what she had done. From a distance, it had looked rough. Old. Neglected. But standing right in front of it was something else entirely. The body was streaked with rust so deep it looked like the metal had been bleeding for years. The paint had almost completely faded, leaving behind a dull skin of grey and orange. One side window was cracked. Another was gone. The door hung slightly offline, as if even the frame had given up trying to hold its shape. The rotor blades were still attached, but they looked tired and warped, frozen in place like the wings of a dead insect. Inside, it was worse. Torn seats. Broken panels. Dust layered over everything. Wires hung loose from the dashboard. The smell of oil, old rain, and metal filled the air. It did not feel like stepping into a machine. It felt like stepping into something that had been abandoned by time itself. For the first few seconds, Elena said nothing. She just stood there with one hand resting lightly against the cold side of the helicopter, staring into the cabin through the open door. Anyone watching her would have thought she was finally realizing the truth. That she had thrown away everything for a wreck no sane person would touch. And maybe part of her did feel that fear. Because this was no longer an idea in her head. No longer a bold thought she could still walk away from. It was real now. Heavy. Rusted. Immovable. Every missing part and every broken piece seemed to ask the same question. What have you done? But Elena did not step back. She looked longer. Past the damage. Past the dirt. Past the shape it had once been. And somewhere behind all that ruin, she saw the first outline of what it was about to become. Elena did not choose that helicopter just because it was cheap, and she did not choose it in a moment of desperation alone. Long before she handed over her money, she had already been carrying a private vision in her mind. She just never told anyone, because she knew how it would sound. Too strange. Too risky. Too impossible. People are quick to laugh at an idea when they only hear the beginning of it. But Elena had not been looking for something polished. She had not wanted a ready-made future handed to her in perfect condition. She wanted something abandoned. Something people had stopped believing in. Something nobody would fight her for because nobody else could see its value. That was the only kind of thing she could afford, and maybe the only kind of thing that matched the way she felt inside. There was another reason too. When Elena was younger, her father used to bring home broken things. Old radios. Bent tools. Rusted engine parts. To everyone else, they were useless. But he would place them on the table, turn them in his hands, and say the same thing every time. Nothing is only what it is now. Wait long enough, work hard enough, and it can become something else. She had never forgotten that. Standing in front of the helicopter, she could almost hear his voice again. Not because he would have told her this was a smart idea. Maybe he would have called it crazy. But he would have understood the way her mind worked. He would have seen that she was not staring at wreckage. She was staring at raw shape. At possibility. At a shell strong enough to hold a second life. And while everyone else saw scrap metal with no future left in it, Elena saw the first real chance she had ever had to build something no one could imagine until it was done. The moment people found out what Elena had done, the judgment came fast. Some heard the story from neighbors. Others saw the helicopter themselves and did not even try to hide their reaction. They laughed. They stared. They asked if she had been tricked. A few people were almost offended by the choice, as if watching someone throw away security for a rusted machine made them uncomfortable in a way they could not explain. Her brother told her she had made the worst decision of her life. A former coworker said she was acting out of stress and would regret it the second the repair costs started piling up. Even the people who cared about her most spoke to her in that careful tone people use when they think someone has lost touch with reality. "Sell it," they said. "Get whatever money you can back. Walk away before this gets worse." But Elena had heard voices like that before. Not those exact words, maybe. But the same message. Be realistic. Stay in line. Do not aim beyond what your life seems to allow. Do not trust your own strange ideas. Do not build what other people cannot picture. That was what made this different. Because for the first time in a long time, Elena did not bend. She listened. She nodded. She let people say what they wanted. Then she went right back to the helicopter. The more they doubted her, the quieter she became. Not weak. Focused. She stopped trying to explain herself. She stopped defending the decision. There was no point. They were judging the shell. She was working from the vision inside it. And still, the pressure grew. Every rusted panel. Every missing part. Every long day under the sun seemed to give the doubters more proof that she had ruined her future for nothing. But Elena kept showing up, and little by little, their laughter stopped sounding certain. The real work began before sunrise and often ended after dark. Elena parked her truck beside the helicopter every morning with the same box of tools, the same worn gloves, and the same look on her face. Not hopeful. Not afraid. Just locked in. The first days were dirty, frustrating, and painfully slow. She started by clearing out the inside, pulling away ruined seat cushions, broken panels, loose wiring, and years of dust that had settled into every corner. By the end of each day, her arms ached, her back burned, and the metal smell stayed on her skin long after she got home. Nothing about it was easy. Bolts refused to move. Rust had fused parts together. More than once, she removed one broken piece only to find two more problems hiding underneath it. Sharp edges cut her gloves. Old screws snapped. Measurements went wrong. Tools slipped. One afternoon, she stood back, stared at the mess around her, and for the first time wondered if everyone else had been right. Because once the torn panels came off and the cabin opened up, the helicopter looked even worse. Less like a project. More like a mistake. But Elena did not quit. The next morning, she came back with fresh plans scribbled on paper. She measured every angle again. Marked lines. Cleaned surfaces. Cut away only what had to go. Slowly, a pattern began to form beneath all the mess. Not enough for anyone else to understand it yet, but enough for her. That was how she worked. One panel. One section. One problem at a time. And as the days passed, people who had mocked her started slowing down when they drove by, because the helicopter still looked rough from the outside. But something about the way Elena moved around it made it clear this was no longer random effort. She was building toward something. There was a reason Elena worked the way she did, and it had very little to do with the helicopter itself. Years earlier, before life became a chain of bills, hard choices, and quiet disappointments, she had been close to someone who taught her how to look at broken things differently. It was her father. He was not a rich man, and he did not leave behind anything grand. But he had hands that could bring dead things back to life. Old engines. Bent metal. Cracked wood. Machines everyone else had given up on. Elena used to watch him for hours, sitting nearby in silence, while he cleaned parts, studied damage, and rebuilt things piece by piece. He never rushed. He never cursed what was broken. He treated every ruined object like it still deserved a second chance. When he died, that part of Elena's life seemed to disappear with him. The tools were packed away. The project stopped. Real life took over. Work. Rent. Survival. The world did what it always does. It took a girl who loved making things and turned her into a woman too busy staying afloat to remember what it felt like to build something with meaning. But she had never fully forgotten. That was why this project reached so deep inside her. It was not just about creating something unusual. It was about reclaiming a part of herself she had buried for years. Every bolt she loosened. Every panel she removed. Every rough sketch she made in the evenings brought back that old feeling. The feeling that her hands could do more than survive. They could shape. They could restore. They could imagine. And beneath that was something even more personal. Elena had spent too much of her life watching things fall apart while she stood there with no power to stop it. But here, with this ruined helicopter in front of her, she finally had something life had not already decided for her. By the second week, the helicopter no longer looked untouched. It still looked rough, still rusted, still far from impressive to anyone passing by, but the changes were starting to gather in a way that made people curious. The inside had been stripped down almost completely. The old seats were gone. The broken control panels were gone. The loose wires that once made the cabin look dead and tangled had been cleared away, sorted, and pushed aside. Now there was space. Real space. And that was when the first real questions began. If Elena was not trying to repair it, then why was she opening the cabin this way? Why was she measuring the floor so carefully? Why was she marking certain parts of the frame with chalk, then stepping back to study them for long silent minutes? Why did she keep bringing in wood, insulation, metal brackets, and sheets of material that had nothing to do with flight? People started slowing their cars near the yard just to look. Some still laughed. But others were no longer so sure. Because the shape of her idea was beginning to show. Not fully. Not enough to name it yet. But enough to feel that the helicopter was being turned into something meant to hold a life inside it, not carry one through the air. Elena cut openings with purpose. Reinforced weak sections. Smoothed rough metal. Built a level base where broken machinery had once been. Every step looked strange on its own. But together, they pointed toward something much bigger than a repair job. And Elena still told no one. She worked with the same silence, the same steady patience, letting people guess while the shell slowly changed around her. Day by day, the helicopter stopped looking like a dead machine and started looking like the frame of a secret no one would believe until they saw it finished with their own eyes. The day Elena finally opened the door and let people see inside, the yard went quiet in a way she had never heard before. No one laughed. No one asked if she had lost her mind. They just stood there, staring. Because the rusty helicopter they had mocked for weeks was gone in every way that mattered. The shell was still there, yes. The curved body. The cockpit shape. The bones of the machine everyone had called worthless. But inside, it had become something no one expected. Warm wood lined the walls. Soft lighting turned the narrow space golden. Clean shells had been built into the curves of the frame. A small bed fit perfectly along one side. A folding table sat near the front window where broken controls used to be. Every inch had been planned. Every corner had purpose. It was not a repair. It was not decoration. It was a home. A real one. Small, unusual, and unlike anything most of them had ever seen, but undeniably beautiful. What used to be dead space inside a wrecked machine had become a place someone could live, think, rest, and begin again. Even the old front cabin had been transformed into a bright sitting area, where the wide glass gave the whole space an open, almost dreamlike feeling. People stepped closer without meaning to. They touched the doorway. They looked through the windows. They tried to connect the wreck they remembered with the place now standing in front of them. And the strangest part was not that Elena had built something stunning from scrap. It was that she had seen it this clearly from the very beginning. At first, people did not know what to say. They had spent so long laughing at Elena's decision that silence now felt like the only honest reaction left. Her brother walked through the doorway slowly, looking from the fitted bed to the shelves, then to the front cabin where sunlight spilled across the small table. He ran a hand along the wood as if he needed to touch it to believe it was real. The same former coworker who had warned her to sell the helicopter stood outside the door with his mouth half open, staring into the space he had once called worthless. Word spread fast. Soon, strangers were stopping by just to see it. Some had heard there was a woman who turned a dead helicopter into a tiny home. Others came because they did not believe the story was true. But one by one, they stepped inside and came out wearing the same look. Shock first. Then admiration. Then something quieter. Something closer to respect. Because what Elena built was not impressive only because it looked good. It meant something. She had taken the kind of object people give up on without a second thought and turned it into shelter, beauty, and proof that vision can outlive doubt. She had done it without a team, without praise, and without waiting for anyone to approve of her idea first. That was the part that hit people hardest. The helicopter had changed. But so had the way they saw her. She was no longer the woman who made a foolish trade. She was the woman who saw a future where nobody else saw one. And as more people gathered around the transformed helicopter, looking at Elena with a kind of stunned respect they had never given her before, something in the air began to shift. In the weeks that followed, the helicopter became more than a strange project people talked about. It became a symbol. Not just in that town, but for everyone who heard the story and understood what it really meant. People came to see the tiny home, yes. They admired the woodwork, the clever design, the way Elena had turned a ruined machine into a place that felt warm and alive. But after the first surprise passed, what stayed with them was something deeper. She had built it at a time when her own life looked uncertain. She had built it while people laughed. She had built it with tired hands, limited money, and no promise that anyone would ever understand what she was trying to do. And still, she kept going. That was why the helicopter mattered. Not because it was unusual. Not because it shocked people for a moment. But because it stood there as proof that broken things do not always belong to the past. Sometimes they are only waiting for someone stubborn enough to imagine a second life for them. Elena would sit inside in the late evening, when the noise outside had faded and the light turned soft through the front glass. The same shell people once called useless now held peace. Warmth. Purpose. A future she had built with her own hands. And the strangest part was this. In saving that helicopter, she had done something even bigger without meaning to. She had saved the part of herself that the hard years had almost erased. The part that still believed in making something beautiful out of ruin. The part that refused to let the world decide what was possible. And once people saw that tiny home standing there in quiet defiance, they stopped talking about what she traded away and started talking about what she created.